This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror series. You're listening to the 80s Slasher Librarian's audiobook presentation of Twice Burned. Keep it scary out there.
We've seen you in your dreams.
When I want you in my arms, when I want you, and all your charms. Whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream, 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 dream. When I feel blue in the night and I need you to hold me tight. Whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream.
Just remember,
I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine, anytime, night or day. The only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away.
Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Twice Burned, by David Bergantino. Chapter 5. Lance got out of work on time, and by 9:30, he and Colleen had arrived at the Jaguar diner in his beat-up Datsun. It certainly wasn't as nice as the car Colleen's mother let her borrow, a brand-new Buick, but it was his, and that made it the best car around as far as Colleen was concerned. As she climbed out of the car, Colleen looked up at the buzzing sound coming from overhead. It was the diner's sign, a glowing Jaguar leaping from a running position in 4 neon outlines that flashed in succession like an animated cartoon. Colleen had always thought a pouncing Jaguar was a strange mascot for a diner, kind of morbid, but no one else complained. One time she had mentioned her feeling to Kirk, who just looked at the sign and shrugged. "I think it's cool," he replied, and Colleen never mentioned it to anyone again. I guess it makes sense, Colleen thought now. A Jaguar catching food, and that's what the people inside do, eat, but it sure is strange. Inside the diner, Lance and Colleen were seated immediately at a booth. Their waitress, a girl about Lance's age named Wendy, gave them menus, and for Lance, she had a lascivious smile. "Hi, Lance, who's your friend?" Wendy didn't even glance at Colleen as she spoke.
This is Colleen.
Lance replied, ignoring the way she seemed to be coming on to him. Even then, her eyes remained glued to him. Colleen didn't bother to say hello. "Nice," Wendy said about no one to no one. Then there was a pause as she looked Lance over, head to toe. She laughed for no apparent reason. "Oh, anyway, I'll be back in a minute to take your order." Lance thanked her. After giving him another once-over, Wendy left. As soon as she was gone, Colleen felt jealous. Lance saw her distress and spoke up quickly.
Don't worry about her.
He said, taking her hand in his.
She's just some sorority girl from college who's after me. I forgot she works here.
"Are you in a fraternity?" Colleen asked him. They hadn't known each other very long. All she really did know was that he went to the local community college, that his cousin Kirk had just gotten him a job at the library, and that he seemed to be the nicest boy she had ever met. But there was so much she didn't know.
Nah,
He replied to her question.
I'm not a frat guy, except for one thing.
"What's that, sorority girls?" Lance laughed. He thought she was making a joke.
No, it's not that at all. It's the parties. They have some pretty killer ones on campus. I know some guys in the fraternities. They invite me, everything's paid for, you meet a lot of people, and just have fun.
"Sounds great." Colleen tried to sound enthusiastic, but couldn't help realizing that some of the people he met and had fun with must be girls like Wendy.
You know.
He said, sensing her questions.
You meet all kinds. Some are not your kind.
He nodded in the direction of the diner's kitchen, indicating Wendy.
And some that you don't even meet at parties like that are your kind.
With that, he squeezed her hand and smiled. Colleen's fears evaporated.
Now, I need a burger. What are you having?
Colleen looked down at her menu for the first time. When Wendy arrived a minute later, Colleen was ready to order a Caesar salad, but the waitress nearly walked away after taking Lance's order. He stopped Wendy, who apologized for being a ditz, and took Colleen's order. Colleen's stomach tightened. She didn't like this girl one bit. Luckily, Lance sensed her discomfort and, in his most charming fashion, told Wendy to bug off when she brought their food. She didn't bother them the rest of the meal. But then again, Colleen and Lance never quite finished their meal. Colleen had made it through nearly half her salad, and Lance had finished most of his burger.
See, I wanted to get into medical school,
He was telling her.
but for a good one, I really need a good undergrad program, and Springwood Community College just doesn't have it.
Then transfer to a university, Colleen told him, aware that she was suggesting the obvious.
I wish, but money's kind of tight right now. That's why I'm living at home and working at the library. I'm saving up, but I need good grades. I know I can get the grades. It's the money I'm worried about. At the rate I'm going, I may need a scholarship to get what I really want, and there's no guarantee, no matter how well I do, that I get one. They're tough.
You can do it, Lance. And then Colleen did something unprecedented. She put her hand on Lance's. She almost pulled it back when she realized it was there. But by then, he had clasped her hand in both of his.
Thanks.
He said quietly, and instead of speaking more, simply gazed into her eyes. And Colleen thought that maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love. Then she felt the sharp sting on the back of her neck. "Ow!" Colleen cried. Then it happened again. Behind her, she heard a familiar, cruel laugh. Colleen turned in her seat and saw the terrible trio, Vicky, Melina, and Tish. "Hey, you weenie," Vicky said as she walked by. In one hand she held a straw from which she had shot spitballs at Colleen. Vicky stood at the end of the table while Melina crawled into the booth behind Lance. Tish sat across from Melina, apparently not very enthusiastic about this current round of mischief. Vicky clucked her tongue at Lance and declared, "You are like the hottest thing. What's a fine cat like you doing with a mouse like this?"
Will you stop picking on Colleen already?
Lance warned Vicky. "Really now?" Melina purred into Lance's left ear. "Are you just practicing? Because when you're through with this girly girl, you got 3. Melina glanced back at Tish, who seemed reluctant to tease the guy who had been so nice to her earlier that day. "Make that 2.5 women who'd like to know what you learned." "That's gross, Melina," Tish mumbled. Melina looked back in shock. "Shut up, Tish," Vicky snapped, then turned to Colleen. "See, weenie, that took guts. Thought I'd tell you, 'cause, you don't seem to have any. You think this college boy needs a high school mouse like you? You're not even a footnote in his book of love." Vicky snickered at her little joke. Melina snorted appreciatively. "What do you think about that, weenie mouse?" Vicky had leaned all the way into Colleen's face.
Okay, that's enough.
Lance was angry now and tried to pull Vicky back. She shrugged him off. "I'm talking to the mouse here," she told him curtly, and turned back to Colleen. "So, got anything to say to me?" Colleen felt herself trembling. Her face was flushed and hot. Vicky's leering grin was only inches away, and Colleen could feel the warmth of her breath. Colleen said the first words that came to mind. "I forgive you, Vicky." There was a beat of silence. Then, without warning, Vicky and Melina burst into hysterical laughter simultaneously. Tish just looked perplexed. Tears began to stream down Colleen's face. "You forgive me?" Vicky shrieked. Other diners looked their way. "You forgive me?" Behind Lance, Melina put her head down on the table in hysterics. One hand pounded the surface uncontrollably. Lance had recovered and stood angrily.
Come on, Colleen.
He practically dragged Colleen out of the booth, threw a $10 bill at the cashier as they passed the counter, and left the diner. In minutes they were miles away. Neither had said a word. Colleen wished Lance would talk because she wanted desperately to erase Vicky's laughter, which was still ringing in her ears. Lance parked the car near the entrance of Springwood Park. "Why did you bring us here?" Colleen ventured to ask when Lance didn't volunteer an explanation.
I thought maybe we'd take a walk.
Lance got out of the car. Colleen followed suit, but reluctantly Lance's face appeared over the roof. His warm smile had returned.
It's a nice night.
He was right. The night was pleasant with a warm breeze, but he was talking about going down into the park. Didn't they close it after dark or something after that girl got killed? Colleen remembered that, not long ago, a girl's body had been discovered just below the jogging path. What she didn't remember was how the girl had died. Whatever had happened, it had been murder, and Colleen had avoided the park ever since. I don't know, Lance. He rounded the car and quickly put his arm around her.
It's okay. The park was out and out closed for a while after that incident. But it's open now, at least till 11.
It must be way past that now, Colleen said hopefully as Lance guided her down the path into the park. Lance held his watch up for her to see. It read 10:20 p.m.
See? Lots of time. Tonight's only seemed like forever. Let's walk, huh?
Colleen gave in. She really had no reason to resist. Besides, she was alone with Lance. You'll protect me, won't you? Lance laughed.
Of course. Not a squirrel alive that would tangle with me.
This got Colleen laughing, and soon they were deep in the park. At first they did not speak and simply enjoyed the night air. Antique-style lampposts stood every 10 paces or so, brightly lighting the area. The smell of green plants and flowers surrounded them. Colleen found it hard to believe that death had ever visited this living place. Then, somewhere in the distance, she heard a car door slam. All at once, Colleen noticed all the dark places behind the bushes, obscured by trees and beyond the reach of the lamplight. "Did you hear that?" Colleen asked, pulling herself closer to Lance. He looked at her with a relaxed smile. "No, I didn't hear a thing. Still skittish after your latest run-in with Vicky?" "Maybe." Lance stopped, bringing Colleen to a halt in front of him. He looked into her eyes with deep concern.
You really should learn to stick up for yourself.
He said gently.
You shouldn't let anyone walk all over you like that.
"Oh, Vicky doesn't really bother me," Colleen said. Somewhere behind them a bush rustled. Lance held her hand, laughing.
Oh, and I suppose those tears coming out of your eyes were from the onions on my hamburger.
At first, Colleen didn't know what to say. No one ever seemed to understand her point of view, but Lance was new to her and she to him, so he deserved at least a chance to understand. "Yes, she upsets me at the moment," Colleen shrugged. "But she's just the way she is. There's nothing I can do to change her. That's why I forgave her." A twig snapped nearby, but Lance did not seem to notice.
Maybe, but she doesn't have to be mean to you, and you don't have to let her. Tell her to peddle her wares elsewhere.
Lance's eyes wanted her to laugh, so she did. "But if I fight her off, she'll go tease someone else. If I can take it, it might as well be me." Lance pretended to stick his finger down his throat and made gagging noises.
Oh, please. I think you've been reading too many books about Joan of Arc. She was a martyr. You don't have to be.
"I've really barely read anything yet, just enough to know I admire her. You know, she was younger than me when she died." "I know." By his tone of voice, Colleen could tell Lance was disappointed by her replies. After a thought, he tried to make light of the situation, and said if she had stuck up for herself, she might have lived long enough to meet a nice guy, have some fun, and find out there's more to life than giving in to bullies, or angry villagers with too much time and fire on their hands. Again, Colleen laughed, but this time an image of the final moments of her dream flashed in her head. Pinching it off, Lance immediately became serious.
All I'm saying is, you deserve better than that.
They walked a few more minutes in silence. Silence, that is, except for the snapping of twigs that seemed to come more frequently, and the sounds were getting closer. Colleen stopped abruptly and turned. "Did you hear that? Those sounds!"
It's nothing.
He said. "I don't know, Lance. I'd swear we're being followed."
It's just the squirrels, Colleen. Here, I'll show you.
Lance dragged Colleen to the edge of the light. Nothing could be seen in the darkness beyond.
I'll scatter those critters.
He winked at her and shouted into the bushes.
Boo!
Silence was the only response.
Come on, let's head back to the car.
He said, and they began to retrace their steps. After a few seconds, another crackling sound came from behind them. Colleen willed herself not to turn around. Just then, a cry like that of a wounded beast rose right behind them. Lance spun around, and a blur of motion knocked him off his feet. At the same time, a second, darker shape emerged from the bushes and descended upon Colleen. Chapter 6. Both the black-clothed figure and the one struggling with Lance burst into laughter at the same time. "Kirk!" Lance yelled. "You jerk!" With that, he threw his cousin off of him onto the pathway and scrambled to his feet. "Ow!" Kirk cried. "You didn't have to be so rough," he said, and rubbed his arm. Colleen finally got a look at Kirk's accomplice, whom she'd recognized as Ricky Santana. His skin was the cadaverous shade of someone who didn't get outside very much, except maybe at night. This was because he spent all of his free time in the dark watching horror movies. One day he hoped to write and direct the ultimate horror movie, and until then he was cultivating a perfectly creepy image. "Hi, Colleen," Ricky said casually as he went to pull Kirk to his feet. Lance appeared at Colleen's side, still breathing hard from the scare. Now standing, Kirk started laughing again. "Man, oh man, you should have seen you two. Priceless. Absolutely." He and Ricky burst out laughing. Lance, however, was not amused. He rushed Kirk and pushed him into Ricky.
What's your problem, Pudgy?
The remark stung Kirk. Ricky stopped laughing. "Cool out, Lance. It was just a joke. You know, like when you'd come and visit and we'd spend all day scaring my mom?"
We were 8 then.
Lance growled.
Now grow up. I don't appreciate being spied on.
He turned to Colleen.
Let's get away from these kids.
He took her hand and began to march off. "Look at the big college stud!" Kirk yelled after them. "Afraid of a little scare?" Lance ignored the taunts as they walked back to his car. Kirk hung his head when he heard Lance's car pull away. Ricky clapped him on the back. "Ah, cheer up," he told his friend. "All is not lost." "But I really like her, Ricky. I'm serious. She's my best friend in the world." "Oh, and what am I, chopped liver?" Ricky crossed his arms and tapped his foot indignantly. "Get out of here. I don't want to marry you." "I guess I better return the dress, huh?" "Stop that. You're not helping." Sometimes his friend Ricky could be such a pain. Ricky managed a straight face and tried to be supportive. "Look, this is just like a movie. You've experienced 2 out of 3 classic stages of a situation like this." "Which are?" "Boy meets girl. You and Colleen got that out of the way years ago. You're currently in the boy loses girl stage." His sly grin returned. "And may I add, you've done a great job at that." "Look, you want me to sock you one?" Kirk balled his fist threateningly. "Geez, you're touchy," Ricky replied, rolling his eyes and taking a step backward. "Anyway, there's plenty of time for the boy gets girl stage." "Yeah, but how's that gonna happen? Before, when there was no competition, she still didn't go for me. Now she's dating Lance." Kirk hung his head once more, but his fists were still balled. In a low voice, he declared, "I hate him." Ricky shook his head. Now, there's no use letting emotion get in the way of matters of the heart. "So what do I do?" Even though Ricky was a pain, he was smart, and Kirk had the feeling that Ricky was about to be a big help indeed. "Well, let me give it some thought, but for one, mellow out. Don't compete." "If I don't do anything, where will that get me?" "I didn't say don't do anything," Ricky said, frustrated that he'd have to explain. "Let me put it this way. Do you think our little stunt tonight is going to endear you to Colleen? I think not." Kirk reluctantly agreed. Remember, a person's only truly formidable opponent is himself. Ricky smiled, basking in the glow of his own wisdom. As they started back down the path, Kirk just had to ask, "Where did you get that one, Ricky?" "Oh, it just came to me." The smile still played on his lips, then he shrugged. "Then again, maybe I heard it in a movie or read it in a book. I don't remember." After a few minutes of driving in silence, Colleen finally spoke. "Don't be too mad at Kirk. You know what he's going through."
Yeah, I know, but somebody could have gotten hurt.
Lance shook his head in frustration.
He really has to grow up and deal.
"I'm sure he will eventually." Lance chuckled.
I don't know. As long as I've known him, dealing hasn't been one of his strong points.
He threw his hands up, momentarily taking them off the wheel. Colleen's breath caught, but he didn't notice.
Mind if I take you home now? It's getting late.
Colleen didn't mind at all. The sooner tomorrow came, the happier she'd be. Then she'd try to have a normal day. At Colleen's house, Lance walked her to the door and kissed her goodnight. It took her breath away as much now as it had the first time. Inside, Colleen watched through the living room window as his car pulled out of the driveway. When he was gone, she walked quietly up to her room and prepared for bed. As she wrapped herself in her covers, she wondered what kind of dreams the events of the day would inspire. Would she dream of Lance, or would she dream of books and fire and monsters? About the time Colleen was drifting off to sleep, Mrs. Waddell was just finishing a cup of hot tea. She was dressed in her favorite flowered housecoat, but the bright daisies that decorated it were in dramatic contrast to Mrs. Waddell's dark mood. The scene in the library with that horrid girl kept replaying in her mind. To be fair, it wasn't even just Vicky Stratton. Most of the children nowadays had a disrespectful streak in them. Not that nice girl Colleen Martini, of course, or the new employee Lance Matthews. It was hard to believe such a nice boy was related to Kirk Newman. Of course, Kirk wasn't so bad, in the scheme of things. He was just mischievous, all in the name of trying too hard to be something he wasn't. She could forgive him, but Vicky Stratton and the others she could not, and it seemed their legions were growing daily. No respect, she thought. Girls in my day didn't dress like that unless they were prostitutes. Not even the slightest sense of decorum or responsibility. Maybe I'm too old for this, Mrs. Waddell thought, as she rinsed her teacup and put it in the sink. Maybe it would be nice to just go to the library to read and enjoy. She did enjoy her books. They truly were her children. And unlike the real children in the library, they never misbehaved. Oh, a writer would put in a naughty word now and then, but it wasn't the book's fault. And besides, naughty words didn't offend Mrs. Waddell. She'd heard them used plenty of times by real people. All kinds of people talked like that all the time when they thought no one was listening. As long as that kind of language wasn't directed toward Mrs. Waddell, that was just fine with her. Turning on the light by her bedside, she picked up the thick volume of short stories that lay on the nightstand. It was unthinkable that Mrs. Waddell would even try to sleep without reading first. Opening to the page marked by an elegant leather bookmark, Mrs. Waddell settled into the pillows she had propped up behind her. A contented smile formed on the lips of Mrs. Waddell's crinkled, paper-white face. Her breathing was strong and steady. Less than an hour later, she was reading the words "The End," finishing a story. But as she turned to begin the next, her contented smile suddenly twisted into a hideous snarl. The book dropped to the floor beside her bed. Involuntarily, Mrs. Waddell's eyes crossed. Panic gripped her, and she tried to scream, but she could not. Mercifully, she blacked out just as her thoughts turned traitor, becoming an agonizing, unintelligible secret code. Chapter 7. Around noon the next day, the phone rang at Colleen's house. Barely shifting her attention from her research materials, she picked up the receiver. "Yeah?" she asked absently. "Hola, it's me," said Kirk in a rush. Colleen tensed. "Look, I'm at the library and I can't talk long. Mrs. Waddell's in the hospital with a stroke." "Oh my God!" "Totally," Kirk continued, his voice all excitement and little sympathy. "She didn't show up for work this morning, and you know how she is. A house would have to fall on her to keep her away from this place." "Kirk!" He never let up, Colleen thought angrily. "Just listen," he told her quickly, his tone now softened a bit. "After she didn't show up and we call and she doesn't answer her phone, Denny goes over there, takes the bus even. Then he takes the bus all the way back and runs into the library like a madman. Scared the hell out of a few people checking out books. So he grabs Lance, who figures out, smart guy that he is, that something's wrong and drives back to Mrs. Waddell's house with Denny. When they get there, Denny points through the window and they can see Mrs. Waddell lying in her bed all twisted in her sheets like a..." He was about to rattle off another barb, but thought better of it. "Anyway, they break into her house, find that she's unconscious, and call 911. Lance just called from the hospital to tell me about the stroke." "That's terrible." Colleen felt sick, recalling how Vicky had cursed at Mrs. Waddell the day before. "Yeah, it's pretty awful." For the first time, Kirk seemed sincerely troubled by the news. "Anyway, that's not the only reason I called." Colleen was instantly suspicious. "I thought you couldn't talk long." "I can't. With Lance at the hospital, the only other person here besides me is the part-time librarian, Mrs. Cosgrove. And I'm not being mean when I say she's dottier than Mrs. Waddell." He wasn't just being mean. Even Colleen knew about Mrs. Cosgrove. "So I better get back before someone needs a book checked out and she has a fit over the computer. But besides news about Mrs. Waddell, I wanted to apologize for last night. I guess I was upset and acted like a kid having a tantrum." His apology was sweet and sincere. "It's all right, Kirk. I understand." "Thanks. But that doesn't make it right. Ricky said something to me that made some sense. I keep that up and I could lose you as a friend, and what would that get me? I don't want to do that." Colleen was deeply touched. "So I'd like to make it up to you. Ricky's helping me, and we've got a surprise for tonight. Will you come? With Lance, of course. It'll be the four of us." "What's the plan?" A laugh escaped Kirk. "You dope, it's a surprise! All you need to do is be ready when we pick you up around 7:30, okay?" "Sure, if it's okay with Lance." "I'll hit him up when he gets back from the hospital. This'll be fun." By the excitement in his voice, whatever he had planned did sound like fun, and Colleen wanted to give Kirk a chance to make amends. It wasn't often that someone offered. "Okay, great." "Excellent!" Kirk nearly shouted. "I better go. I hear the computer beeping like Mrs. Cosgrove is torturing it. Gotta swoop to the rescue now. Bye." Kirk hung up and Colleen smiled. Things were going to work out with Kirk after all. What a relief. Turning back to her books, Colleen didn't look up again until her mother called her for dinner. A car horn honked in front of Colleen's house at exactly 7:30. Colleen pulled on a jean jacket and ran out to Kirk's car. He drove a convertible Mustang. The car wasn't the Porsche Spider that his idol James Dean had driven, but was sporty enough to fit Kirk's would-be hip image. If only he didn't look so out of place behind the wheel. Oh well, thought Colleen. Taking advantage of the warm night air, Kirk had taken the Mustang's top down. Ricky sat in the passenger seat, Lance in the back. "Hop in," Kirk told her. He preferred that passengers leap into his car instead of using the door. To him, that was the pinnacle of cool. Before Colleen could argue, Lance put his arms around her and lifted her into the back seat with him. "Hey!" she cried, giggling at the same time. Lance kept one arm around her after she was finally sitting, and she snuggled against it.
You look like you need a little help with your hop.
He told her. Well, thank you, she told him. You've made me very happy. Everyone in the car groaned. Kirk put the car in gear and drove away. So where are we going? You'll see when we get there, Kirk said mysteriously. He and Ricky exchanged a conspiratorial wink. Colleen turned to Lance.
Don't look at me, I don't know. Hey, did you hear about Mrs. Waddell?
Oh yeah, Colleen had nearly forgotten. How is she doing?
Not so bad, luckily. Do you know about the story about how Denny found her and all that?
Colleen nodded.
She's in the hospital right now. She had a stroke, but not as bad as they first thought. Anyway, she'll be going home tomorrow. They're just keeping her there today while arrangements are being made for her at home. Someone will be there during the day to cook for her and care for her, and Denny's going to move into a spare room and make sure she'll be all right overnight.
Then Lance looked like the cat who ate the canary.
And that's not all.
What? Lance looked ready to burst.
I volunteered to come in the evenings to help Mrs. Waddell with her therapy and to read to her before bed.
Despite his obvious pride, Lance still managed to remain humble. Nurse Matthews to the rescue, Kirk cracked from the front seat. Ricky snickered and adopted a voice like an old-time radio announcer.
Beware, villains, for he wields the mighty magic bedpan.
Kirk gave his friend a high five as they both burst into new laughter. Lance tried to ignore them.
I just thought it made sense for everyone. It'll save Mrs. Waddell money on home care, and it'll be good practice for me for med school. On Monday, I'm going to try to see if I could get some school credit for it.
Ricky was not done ragging on Lance. Aren't we the paragon of altruism? He said sarcastically. Shut up, Ricky. Colleen swatted him on the back of the head. Lance would do it anyway, but I bet you wouldn't volunteer to do it in any case. Ricky twisted around in his seat to face them. He looked wounded. Of course I would. Lancelot just beat me to it is all.
Yeah, right.
Lance was thoroughly unconvinced. You kiddin'? Alone in that house with a gibbering, drooling stroke victim? He held his hands up to his face, mimicking a palsied crone. And an acid-scarred demon from the depths. For this, he glowered menacingly. Heck, that's right up my alley. Ricky, you're heartless. He blew her a kiss. I do my best. Colleen ducked so the imaginary kiss would miss her and fly out the back of the car.
Hey, Kirk, where are you taking us anyway?
Lance's voice had changed. He sounded extremely wary. All at once, Colleen realized the air had changed. It was still warm, but the scent of sulfur was in the air. Even though they were driving over 50 miles an hour, only the faintest breeze blew through her hair. Colleen looked around. Kirk had driven out of the city. Gas jets from ancient steel mills lit the sky in the distance. Colleen had the vague sensation that she and Lance were being kidnapped. Kirk? She let the question hang. Don't worry, kiddos, we're perfectly safe and almost there. Ricky pointed forward toward a pulsating red and blue glow just ahead on the two-lane highway on which they traveled. Up there on the right, Kirk. I see it, pal. Lance and Colleen exchanged a questioning look. Somehow this was shaping up to be not as pleasant as a surprise as Colleen had expected. She forced herself to relax. Kirk deserved her faith. Reaching the blue and red lights, Kirk pulled off the road. Dust billowed under the car from the gravel parking area they entered. The light came from a faltering neon sign above a ramshackle house. As they pulled to a stop, it seemed more like a hut. Shutters hung at odd angles to windows. Tattered lace hung over them on the inside. Arcane symbols decorated the peeling painted exterior. A sickly yellow light bulb barely illuminated the porch that seemed unsafe to stand upon. Where are we? Colleen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Can't you read the sign? Kirk replied, pointing to the neon lights. The sign read, Fortunes Told.
This is our surprise?
Lance asked dubiously. Before Kirk could reply, Ricky asked Lance, Ever been to a psychic?
Nope.
Lance shook his head. Well, surprise! Kirk shouted, as if Lance and Colleen had walked into a secret party.
I don't know.
Lance seemed ready to leave. That would have been fine with Colleen. The whole place looked more than a little creepy. Ricky read Lance's expression and sprang into action. "Come on, Lance, be a sport. It can't hurt ya. I've been to this woman, Madame Zavira." He spoke her name with a fake accent. "She's a trip. This'll be fun, I swear." Lance wavered for a moment. Then he looked at Colleen to see what she was thinking. She nodded slightly, showing that, nervous or not, she was game.
Okay, fine.
"Yes!" barked Kirk. Then he winked at Ricky, told everyone to follow him, and started for the rickety porch.
Couldn't you just have bought us a cappuccino at the coffee house?
Lance asked as Kirk opened the screen door. He almost ripped it off the one hinge by which it was hung. Kirk laughed as he pushed the inner door open and they entered Madame Zavira's domain. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Twice Burned by David Bergantino. Again, I want to say thank you to Jeremy Wilson for voicing Lance, and for thank you to PMDG, which is a friend of his who helped him edit all the lines into a folder for me and numbered them and everything to make it so much easier for the editing. There are a few lines that got missed. No big deal. I went ahead and covered those Lance lines. But yeah, I think it's going great. Thank you, Jeremy, for all your support on the channel. And thank you for voicing Lance. It's kicking ass. I hope you're having fun with it. As far as this book goes so far, at first, I will admit, I was a little... Even when I started tonight, I was a little... I don't know what the word is, because it wasn't disappointed, because I'm enjoying the characters. I guess after Virtual Terror, like, I was expecting it to be another book that just dived right in there and had these trippy scenes, scene after scene. But, you know, I'm actually thankful that it's not the same as Virtual Terror, because I like the fact that this feels like a totally different story, totally different type of narrative, everything. And I'm really enjoying the character development, because we're really getting to know these characters and why they might do things they're going to do. And I gotta admit, that scene with the librarian in her bed was pretty trippy too. And again, making my prediction here, and I swear I've not read ahead in these books, and I will not read ahead of them because I have fun trying to guess where the stories are going. I'm doubling down on the librarian because of that whole stroke thing. Something's off about that. Something's fishy. Does anybody else agree? Because if it's not going to be her, I'm thinking it might be this Ricky character that we just met, Kirk's friend. Because this guy, like in horror movies and seeming to be, you know, that he would enjoy living in an old house with an old lady who had a stroke and a creepy haunted house, whatever. Like, he seemed to be really into that, so maybe him, librarian, or Ricky. I don't think it's Kirk anymore, and I think that the Denny character, the mute, it's just too obvious if it was him. So right now, I'm going to go with Ricky or the librarian if this is a possession angle that Freddy's possessed one of the characters. But yeah, so as far as the chapters go tonight, we had another little meetup with the mean girls. You know, God, I think we all knew people like that in school. They cannot die fast enough, and I hope that they have some pretty cool death scenes in this book. Now, as for Kirk and Ricky, very immature. I can see how, you know, Colleen dating a college guy and him calling them kids, she's going to be feeling like she's a little too mature, you know, to drop to their level, even though she's the same damn age. I think we've all met people like that, too. They date someone a little older, and all of a sudden they're too mature for their, you know, high school friends. But yeah, so the character development was good. We got to get to know Lance more, because we didn't really get to know him a lot before these chapters. Seems like a pretty straightforward dude. Although that whole Wendy waitress girl at the diner, I don't know. It seemed maybe he's got something more going on with her, because she really seemed like she was, expecting something more out of him. But then again, maybe she's just a stalker. Who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised if something about that story pops back up, because it does seem like she was a little too expectant of Lance. The whole stroke scene came out of nowhere. Did not see that coming. It really feels like some type of Freddy thing. I don't know. I cannot be for sure. I'm still thinking, David. I'm thinking it's the Librarian. So if I'm right, awesome. If I'm wrong, and I know you're laughing at me over there, chuckling about my guessing. It's either her or Ricky, as far as now. That could change after I read the next few chapters. I might change my guess. But yeah, so we're at Lady Zavira's, and I'm curious to see where this story is going to go with her, especially with Colleen, with these messed up dreams Colleen's having, the whole Joan of Arc thing. I have a feeling we're about to have a very interesting chapter with this meetup with Lady Zavira. I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes, and I hope you all are too. I'll be back very soon with more of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Twice Burned by David Bergantino. Until then, let me know in the comment section what you thought of tonight's chapters, what you think of the book so far. Are you enjoying it? Are you looking forward to it? Do you have any guesses? If Freddy's possessing one of these characters we've met in the book, who do you think it is? Let me know in the comment section below. Click the like button. Be sure to subscribe. Click the bell for future notifications of all the slasher mayhem brewing in the 80s Slasher Library. We got the podcast, the slash track, so much going on these days. You don't want to miss it. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian saying thanks for listening. Be excellent to each other. Pleasant dreams. And I'll see you next time.